This is the Super Guppy. It looks like a Boeing that swallowed another Boeing. And right now, the entire front of this airplane, cockpit, instruments, pilot seats and all, is about to hinge open like a gate, revealing a cargo bay large enough to park a house inside of it. But everything inside it has to physically disconnect when that nose opens and reconnect perfectly when it closes. One failed connection and this aircraft doesn't fly. And if this aircraft doesn't fly, NASA has a huge problem. The aircraft you see here taxiing in Mansfield, Ohio, is the NASA registration November 941 November Alpha, a Super Guppy turbine, the fourth ever built, the last one still flying. It's based at El Paso International Airport, and it flies only when NASA needs to move something that won't fit inside anything else on Earth. Today, that something is an Orion spacecraft component, the capsule designed to carry astronauts back to the moon under the Artemis program. Parts are manufactured at facilities scattered across the country. Glenn Research Center in Ohio builds propulsion components. Michoud Assembly Facility in Louisiana fabricates the crew module structure. Kennedy Space Center in Florida handles final integration. All of it has to converge at the launch site before a window opens. And some of these components are exactly 25 feet in diameter. That's wider than a 2-lane road. You can't put that on a truck without shutting down every highway in every state along that route. You can't ship it by sea, not when a launch window is weeks away. And you can't fit a 25-foot spacecraft through the cargo door of any military transport aircraft on the planet. The C-5 Galaxy tops out at 19 feet wide, the C-17 Globemaster 18. Even the An-225 Mriya, the largest cargo aircraft ever built, had a cargo bay only 21 feet across. And the An-225 is gone, destroyed on a Ukrainian runway in February of 2022. There was only one. Now there are none. So NASA calls in the Guppy. The 4 turboprops you see hanging off the wings are Allison 501 D-22Cs, the same engine that powers every C-130 Hercules on the planet. On a C-130, those engines push a sleek military transport past 350 miles per hour. On the Guppy, they shove 170,000 pounds of bloated aluminum through the air at 250. Same horsepower, wildly different aerodynamics. It looks like someone bolted C-130 engines onto a whale cosplaying as a 747, because that's essentially what happened. It's not fast. A C-130 outruns the Guppy without trying, but the C-130's cargo bay is only 10 feet wide. Speed doesn't matter when your cargo won't fit through the door. But while the engines can be easily maintained and replaced, the same cannot be said about the fuselage. The bones of this airplane started life as a KC-97 Stratotanker in 1953. That makes the original airframe over 70 years old, Korean War vintage. And the reason why it still has such an old airframe is because of this man. In 1962, an ex-Air Force pilot named John Conroy looked at the space race logistics problem and had an idea nobody at NASA wanted to hear. Enormous rocket stages needed to move from West Coast factories to East Coast launch sites. The only option was barges, weeks at sea through the Panama Canal. Conroy pitched a solution. NASA laughed. An official looked at his bloated fuselage drawings and said the design resembled a pregnant guppy. The name stuck. The funding didn't, so Conroy mortgaged his house, bought a surplus Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, and built the thing himself. The aircraft you're looking at carries a piece of that original. The rear fuselage and tail assembly of November 941 November Alpha came from that first pregnant guppy, the one Conroy built with a second mortgage. But right now, the ground crew at Mansfield doesn't care about history. They care about getting a spacecraft inside this airplane without scratching it. And that starts with taking the front of the aircraft off. You don't use a door, not on this aircraft. The entire nose section, cockpit, instruments, everything hinges 110 degrees to the right. The front of the airplane swings open like a gate, and you're staring straight into a cargo bay 25 feet in diameter and 111 feet long. You could drive 2 pickup trucks side by side through that opening. Imagine your office rotating 110 degrees every time someone opens the front door. Now imagine your office is the cockpit of a 170,000-pound aircraft and every instrument has to work perfectly after it swings back. That's only half the engineering challenge. A control lock and disconnect system sits at the fuselage brake, the point where the nose section meets the cargo bay. Every flight control cable, hydraulic line, and engine control connection passes through this single point. When the nose swings open, those connections physically separate. When it closes and locks, they reconnect. The system has to re-rig perfectly every time. If a cable tension is wrong, the aircraft doesn't fly. Hydraulic line doesn't seat, doesn't fly. Engine control fails to reconnect, doesn't fly. And this happens before every single loading operation. Open, disconnect, load, close, reconnect, verify, every time. Most mechanics get nervous reconnecting a single hydraulic line on a standard airframe with the manual open right in front of them. This crew reconnects all of them at a fuselage brake that was never supposed to exist on an airplane, then climbs aboard and takes off. There's no redundancy in this system. Every connection has to work. Not most of them, all of them. The verification checklist after closing the nose runs longer than the startup checklist on most commercial aircraft. Now that the nose is open and the cargo bay is clear, this is the part where you push a spacecraft into an airplane with inches to spare. The cargo bay is unpressurized, open to the elements. That's fine. Space hardware is built to survive a vacuum. Cold air is nothing compared to what this capsule is designed to endure. The floor runs a rail system with rollers built into the track. An electric winch mounted beneath the floor pulls custom fixtures along the rails. The Orion component sits on a purpose-built cradle designed to distribute the load evenly and protect the spacecraft during transit. Here's what the dimensions don't tell you. The cargo bay is 25 feet in diameter, but the usable floor is only 13 feet wide. The rest of that circular cross-section curves up the walls like the inside of a barrel. The cradle has to spread the full weight of the spacecraft across those 13 feet while the payload extends up into walls that narrow into nothing. Stand inside the empty cargo bay and look up. You're inside a tube. The ceiling curves down to meet the floor on both sides. Anything wider than 13 feet has to fit within that curve or it's not going in. When Conroy built the original pregnant Guppy in 1962, loading was even worse. The entire tail section, empennage, rear fuselage, everything had to be physically detached before anything could go inside. Every time they wanted to load cargo, they took the plane apart. That wasn't a design feature. That was a man who ran out of better ideas and made it work anyway. Van Nuys Air Traffic Control found out what Conroy intended to fly on the first test day and notified police and fire departments to be on standby. The thing took off and flew fine. Handling differed from a standard Stratocruiser, only in a slight decrease in speed from the drag of the larger fuselage. The hinged nose on November 941 November Alpha is the evolution, faster, cleaner, and it doesn't require disassembling the entire airplane every time NASA needs to move something. Once the winch engages and the cradle starts moving, every inch belongs to the rail system. The Air National Guard airmen from the 179th Airlift wing-walking alongside the cargo aren't steering, they're watching, checking clearance on both sides as the payload moves deeper into the bay. The cradle is close to 25 feet wide inside a 25-foot cargo bay, inches of clearance on each side. And the Super Guppy's circular cross-section means the walls curve inward. Clearance narrows at the top and bottom of the payload. One miscalculation, one gust of wind shifting the cradle sideways, and you've got a spacecraft component making contact with the interior fuselage wall. Nobody wants to make that phone call. Hello, Houston? Yeah, we scratched the Orion. Our bad. 10 minutes. The cradle reaches its mark. Hydraulic lock pins engage. Centered, aligned, secured. The nose swings closed. Mechanical locks engage. Flight controls reconnect. The ground crew walks the perimeter one final time, verifying every connection at the fuselage brake. Now the part that shouldn't work. This airplane looks like it was designed by someone who lost a bet. The fuselage bulges above the wing like a balloon about to burst. Nothing about the profile suggests this thing is aerodynamically viable. But it flies. The enormous upper fuselage creates drag, but the wings, engines, and control surfaces were designed to handle it. The proportions look wrong. the aerodynamics work. It's like strapping a shipping container to the roof of a pickup truck. The truck still drives, but every crosswind becomes a fight, and that massive upper fuselage catches wind like a sail. Pilots crab into crosswinds at angles that would look wrong on any other aircraft, because on any other aircraft, the fuselage isn't wider than the wingspan suggests it should be. That bloated profile caps the certified service ceiling at 25,000 feet. A C-17 cruises nearly twice that high. Wing loading runs 86 pounds per square foot. For a turboprop, that's jet territory. 4 turboprops push the Guppy to 250 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Not breaking any records, not trying to. The aircraft was never designed for speed or altitude. It was designed for one thing: getting enormous objects from one place to another through the air. Everything else is a concession to physics. Turbulence that a commercial airliner shrugs off hits different when your fuselage is a balloon. The pilots fly by feel as much as by instrument. There's no flight management computer smoothing things out. No stability augmentation system trimming the aircraft through gusts. The yoke moves, the aircraft responds, and everything in between is mechanical linkage and cable tension. The crew cabin is pressurized, the cargo bay is not. The Orion hardware rides at 20,000 feet in unpressurized space. Pressurized warmth up front, near stratospheric conditions in the back, separated by a bulkhead. Inside the cockpit, the instrument panel is straight out of the 1950s. Analog gauges, round dials, mechanical indicators. No glass displays, no fly-by-wire, no autopilot hold modes that let you take your hands off of anything. If this cockpit had a soundtrack, it would be Elvis on vinyl. A crew of 4 operates from this vintage panel: pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, loadmaster, and they're a select group. No simulator exists for the Super Guppy. You don't build a simulator for a fleet of 1. You learn to fly this aircraft by flying this aircraft. The flight engineer monitors engine performance on instruments that predate digital readouts by decades. If a turboprop starts running hot, he's reading it off a needle, not a screen. Bend this airplane, and there's nothing to practice on next time. The route today runs from Mansfield, Ohio to the Kennedy Space Center, 880 miles, 3.5 hours of flight time. A truck convoy hauling a 25-foot payload would need 4 days, a police escort, and every overpass along the route shut down. The Guppy does it before lunch. For those 3.5 hours, there's no abort option. No divert field along the route is rated for this aircraft with this payload. No spare aircraft waiting in a hangar somewhere. If November 941 November Alpha is grounded tomorrow, maintenance issue, bird strike, structural fatigue in that 70-year-old airframe. The Artemis program has a logistics crisis with no workaround. Every minute in the air is a minute where one hydraulic failure, one turboprop seizure means an irreplaceable spacecraft component is going down with a one-of-a-kind airframe. And here's the part that should keep NASA's logistics team up at night. Those 4 Allison T-56 engines, same family that powers every C-130 on the planet, over 18,000 built, 200 million flight hours logged. Engine parts are a phone call away, but the fuselage, that enormous balloon of aluminum that makes the Guppy a Guppy, was built from scratch in 1983. No parts catalog, no warehouse full of spares. If a fatigue crack appears in that custom upper fuselage, NASA's maintenance team fabricates the replacement panel by hand. Raw aluminum, hand-shaped to specs that exist in exactly one set of engineering drawings. The engines are off the shelf. Everything else is one of a kind. It's like owning a car where you can buy tires at any shop, but if the body panel dents, you need a blacksmith. That first Guppy Conroy built with his mortgage money changed everything. NASA went from 18-day barge shipments to 18-hour flights. The cost in the 1960s, $16 per mile. During Apollo, the Super Guppy carried complete S-4B third stages of the Saturn V, the stage that fired astronauts out of Earth orbit toward the moon. Only aircraft in the world that could do it. Without the Guppy, those stages would have spent weeks at sea while launch windows closed. NASA's own assessment? The Guppy didn't just help win the space race, it made the space race possible on schedule. And it nearly ended before it started. September 1965. During high-speed dive tests, the upper fuselage of the larger Super Guppy collapsed at 10,000 feet. The aircraft was carrying 30,000 pounds of borate in 100-pound sacks as ballast. The sacks burst on impact. Powder filled the cockpit, temporarily blinding the crew. With no forward visibility and a structurally compromised airframe, the pilots had no reference. A DC-9 chase plane pulled alongside and called out altitude and heading while they nursed the crippled aircraft down to Rogers Dry Lake at Edwards Air Force Base. They landed. Engineers redesigned and rebuilt the upper fuselage. The Guppy fleet flew on, logging over 3 million miles across Apollo, Gemini, Skylab, and the space station program. Sometimes aviation engineering isn't about getting it right the first time. It's about surviving when you get it wrong. When Airbus retired their 3 Super Guppies in 1997, replaced by the purpose-built Beluga, NASA picked up number 4 under their barter agreement with the European Space Agency. November 941 November Alpha has been flying NASA's outsized cargo ever since. T-38 Talon fuselages for the Air Force, V-22 Osprey components for the Navy, International Space Station modules that couldn't fit through any other cargo door. Every government agency that needs to move something too big calls the same number. The same single aircraft shows up. The $20 billion Artemis program, one airplane built before most of its engineers were born. And right now, that airplane is somewhere over the Carolinas doing exactly what John Conroy bet his house it could do 64 years ago. But the crew isn't thinking of that bet. Right now, they're betting this old airframe is still stable enough to get them on the ground safely. The Super Guppy descends through Florida airspace with that same lumbering, improbable profile it's had since the day it first flew. From the ground, it looks like a cartoon. From the cockpit, 4 analog engine gauges are reading steady, and the runway at Kennedy Space Center is coming up through the windscreen. The aircraft touches down. Turboprops reverse. The ground crew positions around the nose. Locks release. The entire front of the airplane swings open for the second time today, cockpit and all, revealing the Orion component sitting exactly where the loading crew placed it hours and 880 miles ago, untouched, undamaged, and on schedule. That spacecraft component will go on to become part of the vehicle that carries astronauts back to the moon. It arrived on the wings of a Korean war tanker because nothing else could carry it. The cargo bay empties, the nose swings closed, flight controls reconnect. Verified for the second time today, November 941 November Alpha sits on the tarmac at Kennedy Space Center. One airplane, a cockpit from the 1950s, bones from a Korean war tanker, and the future of human spaceflight riding inside of it. Tomorrow, or next month, or whenever the next component needs to cross the country, the same phone call will go out. The same single aircraft will show up, and the same crew will disconnect and reconnect every flight control on an airplane that exists nowhere else, trusting engineering that has worked every single time since 1983. And if you want to see how the Air Force moves the president's armored limo, you should watch this video. Bye for now.